Taneytown Planning Commission, please come to order. I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. Would you please stand for the pledge to the flag?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let the records reflect the members that's present. Members should have received the draft minutes of February 25th, 2019. Is there any corrections or additions to those minutes?
Just one, sir. In the third paragraph, about 3/4 of the way through, it refers to Memorial Park in the plural. If we just take the S off.
Okay, Jim, you got that? Any others? If not, I'll hear a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, no further discussion. All in favor of the draft minutes approval for February 25th with the adjustments, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. Action items for tonight. Oxy Crematory Service Site Development Plan requesting approval. Jim, would you start us off, please?
Sure. Last month, you may recall, we were just waiting for a couple more agency approvals. Those letters have come in. The plan is on the board. I think there's a small change since the last time you saw it, but before the landscaping approval letter was done. And Joel Bringle's here to speak to that. But everything's in, so the recommendation is for approval.
This would be a preliminary and then possible a final?
Correct. Right.
Okay.
There's nothing that needs to, this would have been a candidate where you could have waived the preliminary plan requirement and gone right from concept to final because there's no subdivision of land or no public streets involved with this one. So there's really nothing that will change between the preliminary and the final. So we can just make sure that the Mylars say final.
Okay.
Good evening.
Evening.
Good evening.
My correspondence with Jim a week or so ago, he said, you don't need to give us new prints if there haven't been any changes. I went, great, no changes, don't have to give you prints. And I'm thinking about it coming up the road and realized that it was at the last time I was here was when we had the discussion about the large deciduous trees, okay? Well, I did put a note on there and resubmit the landscaping plan without the large deciduous trees. So I can walk up here, no big deal. I just put a note here, at the request of the Taneytown Planning Commission, no major or minor trees have been specified.
Okay.
Okay.
That was a change that I had made, I had completely forgotten about since our last meeting. But
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments?
As you
That's
can see,
it, yep.
the landscape approval letter was in your packets
Yes.
for this month. So.
Okay.
Are we able to do this in one motion, or do you want two separate motions?
I'd rather see two motions so we have it
Yes.
documented as two separate motions, one for the preliminary, and then if that's approved, we'll move right on into a final.
I move that we approve the preliminary site plan.
I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion? Any comments from the floor? All those in favor of the motion of approving the preliminary site plan signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Abstain.
Abstain? Okay.
Okay, we got one stay. Okay. Okay, moving on to the same item. Is there a motion for final approval?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Anything from the floor? All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Abstain.
One sustained. Motion carried. Thank you. Thank you.
All righty, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Next item is Maryland Compassion Care and Wellness concept site plan presentation.
Take out the Mylar as well. Circulating.
Jim, would you give us a couple comments on this before we get into it?
Sure. We probably talked about this a little bit a couple years ago, that as production was up and running and demand was increasing, that we'd see the group back to expand into the rest of the footprint of the building. They're currently only occupying, I'll say, ballpark of half of the building. So this plan will increase their growing and processing to fill the rest of the building. And along with that will be some new pads for HVAC equipment. As I'm sure you've noticed from what's out there, the units are rather sizable. So we're talking about an impact on stormwater management, which is really the reason that we're having a site plan. If it was all interior renovation and not much of a change for traffic generation or anything, and we didn't have those units to contend with, we wouldn't be looking at a site plan. But there is going to be an increase, so that warrants another look at stormwater management and concepts before you and in your packet. So.
Okay.
You want to see mine? I don't know if it's too much to see. You see an empty
Someone want to
building.
lead off?
Yeah, good evening, Commission. Randy Bechtel with BPR, Scott Landis with BPR, and Andy Cohen with Maryland Compassionate, and Andy has Josh? Jalen, I'm sorry, Jalen with him. So, like Jim was saying, it's some additional work for units, some sidewalk work. I think we have a disturbance, Scott, what, 26,000 square feet? Yeah, I think so. Something like that. So I'll let Andy tell you a little bit about the technical portion of it and the inside structure and what occurs and what's going on there, Andy.
Did you say it was 26,000 square feet disturbance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 26,900 square feet. Yep.
Yeah, so it's HVAC and 3 more generators too, and a sidewalk. So, I mean, the interior work is similar to what we did before. We're building out another 8 production rooms, a set of bathrooms, actually not a set of bathrooms, 8 production rooms, a cleaning room, some storage space. It's relatively simple in terms of interior. But as we all know, these grow rooms or these production rooms each require their own HVAC units, some of them sizable. So hence all these pads and extra HVAC around both sides of the building and the rear. So is there anything else I can answer for you about interior? Or?
Any more employees?
Yeah, we'll probably have another 10 to 20. We're at about 55 now. We're not yet at 2 shifts, but we may go there at some point. We are there 7 days a week, not full staff, but.
Jim, what does that do about parking areas?
The parking requirement for industrial is 1 parking space per 2 employees on the biggest shift. So we'll tally that up with the preliminary plan, assuming the concept is approved. Those will be things that we'll look at the preliminary plan stage. So I suppose the parking lot tends to be fairly full now, but it may not be laid out in the most efficient way, so they might be able to reconfigure without adding any pavement to squeeze in some more spaces.
The 26,000 additional disturbance, does that add on to the previous?
Yes.
So what does that come up to a total?
I don't think I've got that.
I didn't bring the previous plan either, but disturbance accumulates back to 1992. So one of the reasons why we know we need an amended site plan, we have to address forest conservation, which be a little bit more of that. We have to address the impervious area with the stormwater management. So even though we have approximately 27,000 square foot of disturbance, the impervious area is probably about half that. Some of it's support slope and that kind of thing. So with an amended site plan, we'll address the parking detail, the stormwater, and the forest conservation. It's to the rear of the building. I can't imagine we have much related to landscaping.
What's forest conservation, if I can ask?
Jim, you want to address that?
I'll explain that to you tomorrow. We don't want to bore them.
You'll need time for that. No,
Pick that up from the county.
You may have to, yeah, that's what I said. It's just it's a code to itself, so we'll talk about that and won't bore the commission with it.
Okay, so this evening, actually, it's a
Tonight,
concept site.
I think tonight, Jim, Mr. Chairman, we'd be looking for concept plan approval and some way to get Andy at least doing some work inside. He plans to apply for a building permit. I think building permits have to be signed off by the town. We realize, Jim and I have had a conversation about the length of time relative to an amended site plan. It's a little different what Andy imagines, but we'll do the best we can.
Tomorrow, though.
Do you still have that storage trailer inside that back section?
We'll have to do something with that. Anybody, you can have it if you want. I don't know how we're getting it off that property, but we're gonna probably have to break it apart.
Will there be any floor space left when you're finished here? You've used the whole building now. What about the future? Another building?
Well, to be determined. I mean, it's could be greenhouses or it could be another expansion out the back or the front. But I'd be surprised if we weren't back again in 2 years.
Okay.
The program's exploding in the state, which we all know. Our production, we can't keep up with the demand, so I think as soon as we fill that building back up with with this extra capacity, we will be at the same place again where we can't keep up with demand.
it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, if you can get the help, right.
If it would speed up the process, Chairman, he would bring some samples to the next meeting.
Not violating the rules. Some of you have already.
Is that camera still rolling?
So tonight we'd be looking for concept approval.
Is there any water allocation things that need to be addressed regarding this?
During the preliminary plan, we'll look at the increased demand, or the estimated increased demand. So, and I guess with some historic data, assuming that the grow rooms are going to be set up in a similar fashion, we should be able to come up with a pretty good number, pretty accurate number based on what the use has been.
I mean, do we know how close we are? Because I know we estimated at the very beginning. Do you know how close you are to that estimate in terms of your usage?
We had an issue with the water meter out there. There was some rust or something got lodged in the line, and the meter wasn't operating properly. Okay. So we don't have a great.
So the history
we don't have a very long
thing
history.
Okay.
We've got recent history, but we don't have an accurate number for the whole time that they've been operating.
Okay.
I know we'll be writing you all a gigantic check for the benefit assessment. Unfortunately.
It can be a regular sized check, just a gigantic amount, that's fine.
All right, well, let's get a motion on the floor here, one way or the other then, and then we can move forward.
I move that we approve the concept site plan.
Second.
Okay, motion was made and second. Open for more discussion. Here, anything from the floor besides your people? Besides your people?
Do you know exactly what we need to submit?
Jim, any comment?
No, assuming the vote is favorable, that will allow Randy to get rolling on the preliminary plan. If it's ready before the next meeting, we can go ahead and distribute it to the review agencies and get that review started, and then it'll be formally presented, once ready. I don't know if it's up to the developer how quickly that will happen. So, but if it comes in before the next meeting, we'll go ahead and distribute it to the review agencies and get that work started right away.
Okay, motion been made for approval for a concept site plan. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? None. Motion passed. Thank you, folks.
Jim, you're not saying, we need to make a submission through the county agencies before we come back, correct?
Right, they can, now that you've got concept approval, they'll accept it, and we'll set up a pre-submittal meeting with development review and get that going.
What I was getting at, and necessarily, the next time we come back is much like the previous site plan, we'd probably be looking for a preliminary to follow at the same time if we have the whole.
Yep.
We don't like to do that in the same night. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
I think
good.
we're all set.
Good copy here.
Thank you, Randy. Next item is Carroll County Annual Planning Report. Request for certification. Claire?
Maybe.
So our planning technician for the county, Arkasen, has put together the 2018 annual report. I guess you all have copies. And we're just looking for approval, and we need the chair to sign it. I think Jim provided all of the information that was reported on, so it should be pretty accurate.
Okay. Jim, any comments?
No, that's, you guys kind of know the routine, I think, at this point. So each year the county reaches out to all the municipalities, and we report on subdivision approvals, site plan approvals, any zoning code changes, things of that nature. So, and the county compiles everything and gets our blessing and puts it all together in a nice, pretty package.
Okay, and what are you asking of us this evening here?
A
motion for...
to certify the Taneytown portion,
And
which
that'd
is
be a
what's
letter
before
then,
you.
right? Be a letter to sign then, or not?
There will be. Unfortunately, I did not remember to print it before the front office where the printer is got locked up for the night, so I will have to ask you to stop by
Okay.
another day to sign that.
Okay, and then I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay, motion been made and second to approve, what are we approving?
The annual planning report.
Annual planning report, yeah, thank you. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim, you want to move on to the small wireless towers and all that stuff?
Well, I'm sure, and I'm hoping Jay will probably have a little something to contribute to this, or more than a little maybe. But we've been talking about this off and on for quite a few months now. What we do have some control over that's not preempted by the state or federal level is basically the aesthetics of it. So we can regulate how they look, how tall they are, things like that. So in your packet was a draft ordinance. This has been introduced with the mayor and council. The intent is to approve it at the mayor and council's April meeting. If we don't enact anything this coming month, we will be too late and we won't be able to enact anything. So there's hopefully everybody had a chance to look through things. You know, we've got pages of definition involved with it. It's a lot for the little bit that we can control, I guess. But I don't know if Jay wants to add anything or if there are questions about it.
Maybe we just start with, we have questions and then you can jump in. I have a few, but I'll let some others jump in. And if I have
a
it,
question.
go ahead, George.
I've read this.
Feel bad.
So that means you're well rested now.
How much of it will ever get through?
Well,
When the time comes, is this going to be thrown out?
it could be.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
what I was afraid of.
Let me give you the background, I guess, before you ask some questions. We've done the background. I guess the current situation. in that the FCC's decisions, which this is basically crafted to fit, are in court right now on appeal. That'll be a year or two process on the federal court level. So depending on what happens there, this could be in or out. The state had a bill that would adopt, if you did the industry bill, would adopt what the FCC did in the state code. So there really wasn't much you could do at all. And if you did the community bill, it would do what the FCC did, but allow local control like this. So this is kind of adapted to what the community bill would be. Neither of those bills passed. They didn't have, after hearings, they were withdrawn or whatever you do to agree to go to summer study. Same thing they did last year. So the state bullet is still out there, hasn't hit anywhere yet. And that could come back next year and undermine this as again. So this does the best it can do to deal with what the federal legislation currently is. And if anything changes, we'd have to change too, if we could. And that's the deadline, is that the FCC said aesthetic standards, design standards, had to be in place before April 15th. Or else, if somebody came in with an application and you didn't have them in place, it's too bad. So the effort was, do what we think we can do, and maybe it'll all be worked out by other places who've gone through it before us, and then we can change as we go. That's the plan.
Does this only apply to public right-of-ways?
Yes.
So if Carol Vista, just using an example, would want to put one at their clubhouse, or Antrim wanted to put one on their property, that wouldn't, just doesn't have anything to do with that, right?
This would not regulate the aesthetics and the things. This ordinance would not. However, it would be regulated under the zoning. And let's say that they're going to install a pole. I guess that's how they would do it. Poles are now regulated under our zoning because they formerly weren't, but about a year ago we said now they're regulated. So you would regulate whether a pole now becomes, we put a definition in there, I don't remember what we called it, but it was like wireless communication something. And then that would determine whether it's allowed in the zone at all. And I don't know, with your examples, whether they would be or not.
What if they mount it to the top of their roof?
I think it's still a wireless communication something, whatever we had called it.
The reason I asked that was I know the city's buying land from the Syrians. Well, by the time the right-of-way goes through, it might not even be close to that land.
Right. I mean, that could be.
And we'll have, what, 4 acres or something out there that,
It was whatever
out in the
piece
middle.
would have the, if the right-of-way would go through that, that's the piece that would,
yeah, if it goes through that site.
you're aiming, you're hoping, you got the one piece of the puzzle and you hope the rest fit around it.
That's right.
So,
Just so I understand it better, you got it in front of you, right?
I do.
So on page 4, under BB, you're saying the maximum height is 30 feet.
Yes.
Is that 30 feet of the pole, or does that include the antenna if it goes on the pole?
If it were new, so it would be new, it would be 30 feet
Max.
max.
Okay, and then keeping that in mind, if you jump to page 14,
Okay.
Under 2A, what's the 25 feet? Any new or freestanding antenna pole shall be 25 feet or less. So why is that different from the 30 feet?
Be specific to residential.
I think that means in residential areas, as Jim said. So it's 30 feet, but if you're in residential area, it's going to be 25 feet or less in total height. If an existing or planned residential neighborhood.
Okay, so a new development going in, that would be 25 feet. Okay.
There's no science to these numbers.
Okay, because the other thing I was going to ask on back to page 5, how did you arrive at 28 cubic feet?
I copied it from somewhere.
Okay, that's good enough. I couldn't figure out three.
Other places that went through this,
I mean, a 3 by 3 by 3, cubic feet. That's 27. So how'd you come up with 28?
and I think that's probably what it could be dimensions of that, but they wanted a cabinet. I mean, that's what you're envisioning.
Yeah, that's what I'm
cabinet.
thinking.
And it was like, well, how big could it be? And so that's what they kind of came up with. We came up with the 30 to get around fall distance,
Distance from a property.
because that way we don't need to address it, because there's another requirement in here that it has to be 40 feet setback.
Right, yeah.
So if you have a 30-foot pole, 40-foot setback, it shouldn't hit anything because it won't hit 40 feet in. Otherwise, in areas where they can't meet that, like through here, then they're gonna have to show specific like engineering designs to see how they can have poles that like fall on themselves. I mean, there are poles that like fall within a certain smaller radius if they're broken. I went to law school, so I didn't have to learn this. So,
How many towns are gonna have this ordinance?
right
Or
now, I think
one
it's,
like this ordinance?
it's under 50 right now have them.
Yeah.
And
In the state?
in the state.
Okay.
Oh, this is countrywide, but in the state, I
Yeah,
know about
yeah.
50 have been developing them.
Yeah.
Some towns are just this is all they talk about, and some towns, it's not even on their radar screen. They're not even considering it. The reality is, well, there's two realities. The first reality is our mayor is on the legislative committee in Annapolis, so he is very tied into what's going on there. And what's going on there is happening a lot in the urban settings, even in Westminster, but in urban population centers. And so the sky may be falling for them, and we hear it and say, we should do something too, because it could happen one day. The rural areas, and we're not as rural as we think because we do have fiber coming through the town, and that's really what it is. If you have fiber optic, this could happen. But I have clients that are out in the middle of nowhere with no fiber and barely cable service, and they're like, we should get one of these. And I was like, you don't need to do this, because a cable company or a small cell company is not going to locate there because you don't have enough people. This is about data. I think that was make sure that some people think this is small cells, so they think cell service. It's really about data, and you'd have to have a cluster of people around in order to get the 5G data, or it's not worth it for them to do it. So.
I listened to you on YouTube explaining this to the city. I thought
Joe pretty well covered it, didn't he?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to be an expert in this, okay? A good example of one, I mean, I keep pointing out where I see them. And I saw one the other day, and I kind of looked at it and said, that's not terrible. But it wasn't in front of my house. It wasn't in front of anybody's house. If you go the road that goes from Balkers, and the hotel is there, it's the Best Western or whatever.
WMC Drive.
Yeah, it's right there across from the Safeway Shopping Center near the Best Western. And it doesn't look terrible. It would look terrible out here, but if it were out on Antrim Boulevard or something, you'd drive by it and wouldn't even think twice. So.
I mean, two more questions. Who's keeping a running inventory on what's being installed if they install them?
Here?
Here,
They
for
did it
the
here.
city?
We would have to do that.
We would, so at any given time, you would know how many of them is in our
And
limits.
while we haven't gotten that far, we would hope it would be related somewhat like the cell towers. Like we have cellular antennas on the water tanks, and we know what their term is, and we track it because we make money. So we look for their rental payments to come in. It would be something like that. So
Well, that goes in, yeah, that moves into the other thing. Is there any renewals? I mean, once they do this, are they gonna have to come back every 5 years? I couldn't find that in here.
It is somewhere in the back.
Well, that's okay if it is.
And I don't know, I can tell you off the top of my head what I thought it should have been. I hope I wrote it that way. Was that we wanted them to come in and renew because we wanted to make sure they're still doing the same thing. So it wasn't from like a money standpoint, and it wasn't necessarily from a change of what's out there, because if they need to change it, they'll change it. But What if they're not going to use the pole? Because that's what you're really licensing, if you will. They're not going to use the pole anymore. And they want to keep the pole because the next technology down there, they want to attach it to. And we don't know what the next tech, I mean, I make it up saying self-driving cars might need poles to guide them every so often. If this technology goes away, I might say I'm going to keep my pole in Taneytown because one day I might be able to lease it to the self-driving car people. Yeah, crazy example, but you get it. This says that if you're not using it for this purpose, it has to come down. Because we don't want, you know, other things. We're approving it for this kind of because we have to, because the feds said we did. But if you're not doing it, the renewal won't happen, and then you'd have to take it down. That makes sense.
Okay, so I guess, does anyone else have any questions? So I guess what you're looking from us is a favorable or unfavorable recommendation to the city council for this ordinance, right?
Right, because you all are
Basically.
going to be you're going to be the arena it plays out in. When somebody really wants to come in, they're going to get a site plan, they're going to go through an amended type of process because there's not many reviews except what it looks like.
And it's a shorter
I want
time
you to be
frame.
comfortable.
And did you talk about the shorter time frame that this will require?
This is going to be a problem for what they call the shot clock. And the shot clock basically is set up by the feds, and it says an application comes in that we have to say it's complete in a certain period of time. If it's not complete, we can make them redo it, and the clock starts over. Kind of like football, okay? The clock starts over on a new play. But if we don't approve it within the specified period of time, it's deemed approved without us.
So if they fail to put up notices to the neighbors, like on page 13F,
Right. That would be.
if they don't give us our 15 days notice before our meeting,
They would redo that. That wouldn't count then.
okay.
Our problem is, you know how we normally do where the agenda is, what, a week before? 2 weeks before our meeting. So technically, 2 weeks before the meeting, things had to be done. And let's say that you didn't want to act on it at this meeting, okay? Because that's what we sometimes do. Well, 2 weeks before, plus this meeting, plus another 4 weeks, would take you past the shot clock.
So they'd automatically be approved.
Or we would come up with, when it deals with one of these, we'll be having special meetings. And we can get around at that. And we figure there's no point in fighting. That's the shot clock. But we could turn around and say, well, we're not going to meet tonight, but we're going to meet again next week. Okay, we'll meet again next week. Because if it's all in order, and some of them will be in order because they're not that big of a deal. The bigger deal ones, I don't think are going to be the installation of the antennas. I mean, it depends on where they are, but let's say they're out of the way. The bigger deal ones are going to be the installation of the ground stuff. Because they're going to put it in front of your house in the right of way, and now you're going to have to mow around it, and park around it, and all that kind of stuff. And that's going to really irritate you. So we want to see how we can minimize that, putting it underground, attaching it to something, moving it down the block. If the pole can be here, it could probably be over there, that kind of stuff.
Is this a wooden pole or a cement thing in the ground?
We don't know.
They'd have to suggest.
Could be a couple different things in here, it said.
And what we're trying to get them to
Camouflage
do, to some extent, is use existing poles. So if you can put them on a pole that's already there, that's better than putting another pole up, is the idea.
Well, there's not gonna be many poles there.
Well, that's the thing, is they want to use Potomac Edison's poles, but Potomac Edison won't let them put their ground hardware on the pole. So that's an issue. We don't really want them to use our poles in the development that are streetlights because they'd be redone and have a pole up. But we don't want other poles out there either. Some towns came up with a totally different thought. They said, we don't mind poles. We want you to put, if you're going to put a pole in, you're going to put them at every regular interval that one every half a block, and you're going to put street lights on them. They're all going to look the same. And they said, that's how we're going to make you pay for our street lights, by putting up lots of poles instead of just one in an odd spot. I don't know that this is really ever going to affect us in the very near future. I could be wrong, but Westminster's got them. No place else around here that I know of hasn't yet. So, but we did have some company propose, 2 years ago? I think they came in and they said, we want to do it, and they were going to do it at the weirdest locations, like out off of Grand Drive on a back street, but they just kind of fell by the wayside.
And keeping in mind that 5G devices are not even on the market yet, so they're just there doing nothing at the moment.
There may be some changes to this between now and when it's adopted next week or the week after. That'll be minor. I mean, there's some things that we found in here that reference wrong sections and things like that, but there may be some minor changes, but nobody wants to do this again. We want to be done with it.
No wonder.
All right?
All right,
No wonder.
all right, I'm looking for a recommendation.
Make a motion to approve ordinance 3-2019.
I don't think we're approving it. We're just
Well,
making a recommendation to the city council.
Recommendation to approve it. It'd be the same thing.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Anything from the county? All right.
She doesn't want to get involved in this.
I'll do something for someone out there. All right. The recommendation's been made for favorable approval. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Carried. Thank you. That wasn't as hard. Jim, you want to move on with your report then?
Ready? We've touched on most of what was in my report already. I do want to call your attention to, in your packet, there was another version of the Memorial Park drawing. New improved, I hope, location for the proposed gazebo. It's kind of moved back to the area, the open space area between the Neos playground and the tennis courts. And just to clarify something, this plat drawing that I took this from is an older drawing of the park. It actually still had the swimming pool on there, which I kind of whited out to add the Neos playground and, you know, sketch that stuff in for you. But it also depicts the tennis courts back when we had 4 tennis courts, so that fence is not as close to the gazebo as it looks on this sketch. But we took comments from last month's meeting under advisement, as well as some internal staff opinions. And we did meet with the vendor down at Memorial Park, and they also supported the recommendation to move it to a more open area rather than the location that was proposed last month. So nothing changes in terms of, you know, disturbed area, any of the things that would trigger a site plan. So there's no reason that a waiver wouldn't still stand, but I didn't want to have the gazebo not be where you expected it to be when you see it starting to take shape out there. So
Still no plans of a sidewalk to make it accessible from the drive or the parking lot?
And we may add a blacktop path over to it. There's a path that goes from the parking area to the Neos playground, and we may just kind of tie into that path. That will not be part of the contract for the gazebo, but it's something that Bob Mitchell, our Parks Director, and I have talked about already, so we're hoping that we'll have some money in the parks budget to be able to do that, because it would be nice to have a paved walking path to it from one side, if not, then leading back to the blacktop driveway closer to the horseshoe pits. So, but we definitely want to have a paved walkway of some sort to it.
So do we need another motion to cover this,
So
or can we just?
If you're comfortable with the proposed
Consensus
location,
of the commission?
consensus is wonderful.
Okay. George, you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
I'm great.
Holly?
I'm good.
Jim? Okay. Consensus?
Good.
We're okay with it.
I think it's a better idea.
Okay. Go ahead, Jim, then. I lost your page.
Alrighty. Something I did not put in my report that I realized after it went out is the Board of Appeals heard the Meads Crossing backyard variance case for, you remember a couple months ago, Meads was in here looking for a variance up to 7 feet, I believe it was, for the rear yard, so they would be able to build at a minimum 10-foot deep deck on any of the townhomes out there. and the Board of Appeals did grant that variance. So Meads will be able, you know, if the buyers opt to have a deck, basically anybody who buys one of the Bob Ward townhomes will be able to have a 10-foot deck on the back without having to go as individuals to the Board of Appeals. So, so that was granted. And, let's see.
Before you jump off Meads Crossing,
Yeah.
I know we had a big conversation about the exit in the back. I noticed they put sliding doors
Yeah, there's sliding doors.
in all
in there.
those now, so.
Went through
But
one
I
of
went to
those
Frederick,
houses.
and some of the townhouses in Frederick have no rear doors, a lot of them.
Well, I think due to our conversation we had here that night, I think that might have helped the issue.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yes, it does. And it looks good with the sliding patio doors there in the back.
They got them up there. They're high, but they look high anyway.
Did they agree to do that?
Sorry?
Did they agree to do that? Install doors?
Nothing formal.
But they're doing it.
But they're doing it, they're in there.
So
Are they
far.
gonna do it in every house though? You think they will?
Everything's out there is done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're not obligated to because we don't control the,
Yeah.
you know, the
I went through one of
administration on
those.
the buildings.
Not too bad inside.
The GC also, he agreed, he thought it was a good idea.
yes, yes.
You know, said the salesman wasn't playing, but it's money. You have a light, you have a stoop and all that, so.
It's just a good sales gimmick to have.
Well, it was a positive moment there.
Well, I mean, you know, I have a property over in Colonel Drive, and every week, you know, it's trash day, it's windy. And then when it comes time to trash cans, we had a situation years ago over in Red Tulip. People wanted to keep their trash cans out in the front of the building. Well, a lot of neighbors didn't like that. But from going around back to the front is a problem. And then you had the police involved because the people were going trespassing through other people's yards. And that's the thing that you think about when these knuckleheads come in here and they do this kind of stuff. It affects the city for the rest of its shelf life.
Right.
Okay, Jim, thanks. Go ahead.
That's pretty much it for my report. We've had kind of a lull in action on zoning certificates issued for no homes. Only had one so far this month, so that's slower than it's been for a while. But you know, but there's certainly plenty that's going on at both Meadowbrook and Meads Crossing. In Meads, the railroad crossing has been installed. I don't know if anybody's been out there in the last week or so, but that's a relatively new highlight, I suppose. So so that's out there if anybody wants to drive out and, you know, zoom back and forth across it or something. I don't know.
I drove out today. I drove all the way through.
Just jump back to Meads Crossing again. Are they putting railroad crossing gates?
No, it'll be more like Meadowbrook, Keenan Street.
Okay,
They'll have the overhead lights, but they're not gonna have the arms.
okay. Yeah. They did a good job on that track and the road coming in. That road looks nice.
Yeah, I think once the wear course or the top
Yeah.
course goes down, I mean, right now you kind of have that little mound where they, you know, built up the blacktop against the crossing, but certainly even that's better than
Yeah,
what was there.
You can actually drive from Meadowbrook through now.
I did that today.
I did today,
I got lost, but I did it.
yeah. I kind of enjoyed it out there. That farm's a lot closer than I thought it would be when I drove out there. I mean, you can really see that farm from the development.
So I guess while we're on Meads, I'll kind of jump into
Construction, the rest of it.
active projects, but Meads is looking for use and occupancy permits for some of the units that are very close to being completed. But there's some issue or some things really aren't ready with regard to the sewer pumping station out there. We're also waiting on street lights to be erected near the homes that they want the UNOs for. That's part of our use and occupancy checklist, is that there's a street light within so many feet. And we also have some manholes that didn't pass their vacuum test. So there's a bunch of little punch list things that we really want to see taken care of before we start, even for the model homes, you know, before we start having toilets flush and, you know, things going through the system. So I'm sure Meads is not real happy with me at the moment, but they have some things that need to happen before we start issuing UNOs. But on the positive side, they're in that, you know, the homes are coming along, you know, they've managed even with the weather to get the lots graded and, you know, be in a position where they're even entertaining UNOs. So, I mean, they're definitely making progress out there. It's just they've been emphasizing, I think, the homes and lots and kind of letting the pump station sit without staying on top of that. So unfortunately now that's kind of coming back to haunt them, that with that station not being really ready, we don't want it to be operational without the, you know, the manholes passing and the grading at the pumping station being done and things like that. So hopefully this time when we sit here next month, hopefully we'll have houses with UNOs and the pumping station will be.
Looks like they got a long way to go yet, though.
Yeah.
They got some sold signs on out there.
Yeah, they've sold a handful already, even without a model being open yet. So that's
because they're using the model in well, I guess townhome you're talking
right,
about.
right. Yep. And there's no model for you know, there's no model open for any of the Ryan homes or the Bob Ward single family, which is going to be a different model home than they're putting in at Meadowbrook.
Right.
You know, so you know, there are no models open yet or no finished models open in Meads Crossing. I don't know if, you know, you can go out there and wander through, but officially there are none open yet. So.
Good job.
Yeah. Let's see. Tannery Barn, they've started work on their conversion to commercial. As you recall, everything is done currently under a residential building permit. So they have applied with the county. We've done some flow testing out there at the hydrants for their sprinkler system and things of that nature. So they are moving ahead at this point. I don't have an anticipated date for completion, but you know, I know it's at idle as far as we could tell for a while, but they're finally moving on that conversion. So that is really about it as far as anything noteworthy for ongoing projects. If anybody has questions, I'll do my best to field them.
Anything?
Have you heard from the boys that were gonna do the beer?
Yes, their architect is, we think, close to having their plans for fitting out the space. So we should be seeing a permit application for them fairly soon. And we do need to, the mayor and council authorized them to allow them to pay their water benefit assessment over a 10-year period like we offer for downtown businesses as an incentive. The mayor and council opted to extend that incentive to brewery fire as well. So we have a little more homework to do on that end. Basically, we need to come up with an agreement that will be between the city and the property owner, which in this case is a little different because the brewery guys are going to be tenants, not the property owner. So still some details to work out on that, but they are, sounds like they're getting very close to pulling the permits to start actually fitting out the space. So far, they've just been like ripping up carpet and you know, getting rid of carpet adhesive and cleaning up the space.
Well, they put a thing out saying they're hoping to be open June 1st.
Not that far away.
That's
Suppose
what
they're
they
not
got
there
out.
It's going to be
10
here
years.
before you know it, but
It was them too.
I would not be optimistic that they'll hit that because I don't think that they have any. I haven't been in touch with the county as far as authorizing review of the building plans without having a zoning certificate. Usually the sequence is they would have to have a zoning certificate before the county would accept their building permit application. We do make exceptions to that sometimes, particularly like when there's a site plan involved, that we will give the county the okay to accept their building plans to get them into the review process so that they can be reviewing the building construction stuff while we're reviewing the site plan, but we won't sign off on anything until the site plan is done. So they kind of know the risk that, you know, they can move ahead, but if something changes on the site plan that warrants a change in their building construction, you know, they'll just have to deal with it. But as far as the brewery goes, nothing has crossed my desk, and we haven't had any communication with the county about accepting plans out of sequence or anything. So I don't know what the review time at the county is running right now, but I think June is very optimistic, considering no plans have been submitted
They're
yet.
hoping it anyway.
How much money was set up to be paid over 10 years?
The water benefit assessment is $5,110, and they are intending to use the existing sewer connection. But as far as demand, they did warrant a separate connection, and they wanted to have a separate meter to the brewery portion of the site. So, and I suppose that's something they had worked out with their landlord, so that they can be metered and billed for water separately than the rest of the bowling alley.
Maybe my memory's fuzzy. I didn't think it was 10 years. Did we go that long?
I
Seems
believe
awful
so.
long for $5,000.
Those are not there for 10 years.
We can go back and check the meeting.
Okay, it's been several months, but I didn't think it was 10
The owner's
years.
gonna have to pay. I mean, no matter what, our deal is probably gonna be with the owner of the building.
Okay.
And he's gonna have to figure it out, or we could work with him, but they're gonna have to be on the hook.
Landlord.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jim, with businesses, commercially, does the business pay, is the business in charge of the water bill, or is it the building owner?
The bills go to the property owner.
Okay.
So we do have the ability to send copies to tenants now with our current water billing system, but ultimately it's the property owner's responsibility to make sure the bill is paid.
Okay.
Did you say you're sending them to the tenants now?
We have the ability.
Oh,
Right, we can send them a copy. We would still send
Oh, I
the
see.
bill to the
And
property
that's
owner.
not always a good thing.
Right.
I would imagine not.
No. All right, go ahead. Is that it, Jim, or was there more?
Yep.
Jay?
The only thing I have other than what we've been dealing with and stuff that doesn't relate to you is, we talked about the Board of Zoning Appeals appeal, the appeal for Sheets, and that is progressing. So right now, the city has become a party. We filed the answer to say we want to be a party, a respondent in the case, and so far, no one else has. The deadline, I think, is another 3 or 4 days off, but basically, it's the people that you would expect. It's the Exxon and the Liquor Basket.
Lisker Barn.
Yeah, those people versus the Sheets tenant and the city. So that's how that's going to go down. We have to, the city has the obligation to produce the record, the transcript of all the hearings, and that takes 60 days. So we're in the middle of having that, done by something. The only downside is we're going to have a issue with the second. There was 3 hearings. There was 2 major hearings and a motions hearing in between. There was a technical difficulty with the camera, with the audio, and we have no record for the motions hearing. So I don't know what that'll mean, but I can't make it up out of nothing, so I guess the court will decide how that affects the case. That's going to go on for months yet. Maybe we'll have something by the fall on that. That's it, unless y'all have questions for me. Okay.
County update?
Yeah, I have just one update concerning the comprehensive rezoning. The residential tax is being worked on right now. It should be going to planning commission this spring. For commercial, industrial, and employment campus, the tax has been before the county commissioners. And right now, about 2 weeks ago, we just sent out about 1,500 letters to property owners residential, or the employment canvas, industrial and commercial tax and maps will officially be adopted, probably by the early summer. I'm thinking.
Anything else? Go around. George?
No, I don't have anything.
Bradley?
I have nothing, sir.
Nothing, sir.
Paul? Jim? Okay, it looks like the next meeting is April 29th. So with that, I'll entertain a motion for
So
adjournment.
move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
All right.
Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Holly?
Thanks, sir.